Now, I'm going to be honest with you all, this chapter, it did not meet my expectations. I was fully hoping and expecting an Azumi masterclass within this chapter. However, that doesn't mean it was a bad chapter, and it doesn't mean I didn't like it. I actually did. I actually really did enjoy this chapter. So, let's talk about it.
Sometimes you gotta close the door to open a window.
Also, real quick before we get into the video, consider subscribing. I am trying to hit 40,000 subscribers before I turn 30 in August. So help a brother out. Also, go and check out some of my other content. I do other manga stuff and I do comic book videos now as well. So go check all that out. Anyways, this chapter opens up showing us the underground headquarters within the Kamunabi. That is essentially a massive point of knowledge which gets explained by Kudo fairly in depth. Now, this area reminded me of the archives from Coruscant in Star Wars. It's just a big area of knowledge on all things Star Wars related, I guess. But Kudo explains how everything you see here are all manuals for sorcery. Not the kind of sorcery that is innate at birth, like basic teleportation and force field magic, or more academic stuff that you can learn, which is actually what Shiba has learned. And we kind of figured out on stream that Shiba technically hasn't shown us his original sorcery yet, unless teleportation is his original sorcery, in which case unlucky. But it's more than likely that that dude actually has sorcery outside of teleportation that's available to his whims and commands right now. Interesting. But this place is jam-packed with formulas and knowledge. Now, as I typed the script for this video, an idea occurred to me. What if the Hishaku has a secondary goal here with their assault, the deletion and the destruction of all of this knowledge? Think about it for a second. Yora has already demonstrated that he is the type of dude to use information as warfare in order to achieve his goal. He did the whole thing with pamphlets and misinformation against Samora in the village that he lived in. The Hishaku have also demonstrated that they have no problem using hostages. So their extent of their warfare seemingly knows no bounds. So to that extent, Yora eliminating all of this knowledge will essentially serve to wipe out the Kamunabi from its roots, because as long as this archive stands, sorcerers can be trained at the Kamunabi, they can be trained to Shiba and Azumi's level, and they can also just keep going more and more. So as long as they have access to this information, they can keep appearing. But if that information no longer appears anymore and they no longer have access to it, they can't raise more sorcerers. That's even a point that is made within this chapter. Quote, "Education is a crucial job. We are severely short-handed these days. Our trainers are the foundation to address that issue." You see where I'm going here? There is a few more points within this chapter that I'll address throughout it that are indicative of something that is going to happen to the Kamunabi, and Hokuzono has like telltale signs of this. Anyway, Kudo explains how the Masumi have studied everything within this library, and if Hakuri did, he would also be on par with them. Now, Hakuri notes at the loud bangs and the crazy racket that is going on right now, to which Kudo mentions it's probably just Azumi brawling, which is one of two things. One, what we're seeing right now coincides with Azumi wiping out those two goons that we saw in the previous chapter, or two, Azumi's fight with the mustache Hishaku is actually taking place off screen, which makes me incredibly sad to think about, to be honest with you, because as I mentioned at the start of this video, I was really looking forward to seeing that fight play out. I really want to see some shit from Azumi here, but for whatever reason, Hokuzono is really holding us by the short and curlies. He's sitting us down in the cook chair right now. He's really holding out on showing us these up echelon fighters. I really want to see Shiba in an all-out brawl, and I also really want to see Azumi in an all-out brawl, but there's got to be a reason for it. Anyways, Kudo continues explaining how important the information in this library is. There are 7 practitioners on par with the Masumi, but with varied areas of expertise. They trade off occupying our core state where they operate the force field. If someone tries to bust in, not only is it really strong to begin with, but they are constantly repairing it. It is absolutely impenetrable. And herein lies the big problem. I made a fairly big example of this in the last video where I talked about these two goons who I just genuinely didn't give a fuck about because I just knew that they were going to die. Hokuzono has this telltale sign for when things are going to go horribly wrong, and it's when he explains that a thing or person in great detail and describes how good that thing or person is at their thing or specific job. Case in point, these two dipshits right here, they were some big bads who literally had their heads caved in within a couple of pages within the chapter. Hokuzono has gone out of his way to explain in depth 2 things within this chapter, and we're only 3 pages deep. 1, the library and how vital that knowledge is, and 2, the barrier and how impenetrable that is. Which, most of these things are probably going to fail soon and catastrophically, which, as I mentioned, there are many points within the chapter where Hokuzono goes out of his way to explain just how good said thing or person is, so expect the worst. I am. Anyways, Kudo does mention that this barrier does let sound through, so the booms get louder with Azumi's fight, which made me think, I really hope there isn't anyone within the Hishaku that uses sound sorcery to inflict damage, because if that's the case, that might be a problem. to be honest with you. Maybe if you create an impenetrable barrier, maybe you should also eliminate sound, because sound can cause damage. You know, eardrums, you take out the eardrums and all of a sudden they're wibbling and wobbling all over the place. But Hakuri mentions how it's getting louder, to which Kudo tells him Ishiki has probably joined the fight. Now, this is perfectly in character, by the way, because I mentioned this on stream, but this dude, he's been itching to fucking fight. He's been itching for a scrap. He even offered to spar with Samura after simply being told by Samura that he's getting old. This dude trained Asami and Shiba and he couldn't fucking wait to spar with Samura. So I think it's safe to say that that motherfucker is about the fucking smoke. But it turns out that all of the Kamunabi elders might also be about that smoke, because Kudo explains further all of the upper echelon are highly skilled, though Asami is on another level. Now, as for me, I'm not much of a fighter. I will go back to that in a second, because I think that's very important as well. As Kudo says this, we get to see all of the higher-ups of the Kamunabi, but the speech bubble is coming from Kudo, which I just thought was just a nice little touch. I like the way Hokuzono details these panels. It's quite cool. Another nice touch is Hokuzono introducing and reintroducing more members of the Kamunabi here. Some new faces and some more old ones. One you might be familiar with that you've definitely seen before. Well, technically two. Ikuto right here. Ikuto was a part of the anti-Cloud Gouger squad that was introduced way back when in chapter 11. However, that squad was mostly wiped out. Two we've been waiting on recovering for here was Kazani, who lost his left arm, and then Ikuto, who lost both of his legs. Now, finally, Ikuto makes his reappearance, but you'll notice a familiar mask-shaped object has appeared beside him, almost as if it's a stand now. We saw this dude fighting very, very closely with Ikuto. He also kind of reminded me of kind of animalistic. It's like almost Ikuto was kind of walking a dog when he's first introduced with this guy. Anyway, Kudo carries on explaining how most of the members of the council are up there in age, but the ones fighting right now are probably their best bet. Each of them commands their own troop directly, and almost all of the forces are currently on site. Now, again, I mentioned how I believe the archive may be destroyed by Yura in an effort to eradicate the Kamunabi, but the more I'm thinking about it, the more I'm expecting an Order 66 type of situation within a Kamunabi HQ to play out here, because one of the reasons I've arrived at this conclusion is based on this little interaction with Hakuri, Kudo, and Ishihira. But I will swing back around into this in a second, because it's all conclusive. I swear, it's all important. I don't even think that's a word, actually. Because before all that, Kudo once again goes on to brag about how important the library is and how strong the barrier is. Again, he's really nailing this all home. But at the same time, we get to see some thoughts running through Asami's head. At this point, something seems off. The Hishaku aren't even using the Dan Sekai like they did at the Sanso. They operate very strategically. Even if their plans have gone haywire, would they really show up and knowingly waltz into a death trap? Now, this point right here sent alarm bells ringing through my tiny little noggin and brain case right here, because of every point in turn that we've seen the Hishaku, they are almost always 3 or 4 steps ahead of everyone who they are countering with, who they have come across, which is why earlier I told you to start expecting the worst when it comes to the Kamunabi and the HQ right now, because this all ties into my idea of an Order 66 scenario playing out here. And I hope you're getting the vibes here, because it's almost like this tree hat Hishaku here is like giving orders to certain soldiers and they're just kabooming, kaboom, kaboom, kind of like Order 66 style. Anyways, Hakuri and Kudo enter the elevator with an instructor who is called Ishihara, who talks about how he's dedicated his life to this country, and he even served in the war, and who talks about how proud he is of his daughter, who will be 4 next month. After pulling the photo away, he pulls out a knife and says he cares about her even more than this country, and proceeds to cut his own neck right in front of Hakuri and Kudo. Now, funnily enough, this isn't the first time that this has happened to Hakuri. If you recall, in chapter 35, lot number 24, a girl with the icy skin, a girl Hakuri had thought that he had found the common ground with, both being held captive by the Sazanami family, both victims to his father's desire to run the auctions. Eventually, this woman comes to slice her neck in front of Hakuri here, and now if I had a dime for every time that someone sliced their neck in front of Hakuri, I'd only have 2 dimes, but it is kind of weird that it happened twice. Hokuzono really wants this fucking man to suffer, not only mentally, but also physically. Now, Ishihara's head, it explodes, and pine tree branches start to just explode forth, trying to encapsulate everything within its radius. Now, once again, this isn't the first time that it happened. Way back in chapter 2, this goon exploded after being caught by Chihiro. Now, again, if I had a dime for every time someone exploded into a pine tree, I'd only have 2 dimes, but it is, once again, weird that it happened twice. If I had a dime for every time I made a 2-dime joke in this video, I'd have 2 dimes. But again, it's weird that it happened twice. Someone out there is probably stoned watching this video, and that little segment should probably send them through a fucking loop. Anyways, the pine tree explodes outward, and Kudo drops Hakuri through the floor, shouting Warrior's Path and telling him not to worry about him. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, this dude is most likely dead as fuck. Either that, or he faked his death and is actually a Hishaku spy / informant, especially given how he is not much of a fighter. Again, information, I'm suspect of everyone right now. It's just a crackpot theory, but anyways, this guy who's monitoring the barrier here, notice how there is unregistered energy explosions at 4 locations on the force field. Now, underneath him, we can actually see 4 splashes in the water, and I'd be willing to bet that each splash represents an explosion. And it's worth noting that one of these explosions happened within the room that we've actually seen the higher-ups in. Interesting detail right there. Now, Hakuri climbs out of the elevator shaft and calls for help to these two, telling them that Kudo is above, but before he can even finish the sentence, they've drawn blades on him. And it's here where we get to see the true extent of just how nefarious the Hishaku are, because these guys' families are being held hostage by the Hishaku. And Hakuri quickly pieces this all together, and it's here where we cut to Mr. Hishaku, who seems to be sat inside of the Kamunabi headquarters. And the only reason I think this is due to the pine trees here and here. I mean, he could easily just be sat up topside right now, outside where we saw him last, but I feel like he could probably do more damage from within the Kamunabi headquarters. But he is on the phone, crossing names off a list and telling whoever is on the other side of that phone that Ishihiro's family can be released. Now, it's worth noting that the remaining names on this list are people that we should probably watch out for. There's names on here that I couldn't make out, and there's 2 that I could only make out, which seem to be Juro and Honda. The others seem to be hard to discern. So if any of you guys have that zoom and enhance type shit, maybe have a look at that chapter, maybe have a look at that panel. But it is very, very clear that the Hishaku have infiltrated many levels of the Kamunabi, taking people's relatives and forcing them into helping their nefarious schemes and plans here. But these goons who have cornered Hakuri talk about cutting his limbs to make sure he doesn't do anything silly. But it's here that we see Hakuri being like, how are you going to do that when you haven't got a swords? And he teleports their swords, both of them, to the warehouse. But it's important to note that Hakuri's mask, when it appears, still has a crack on it. In comparison to Kyora's, which was obviously clean and clear, but obviously as he got more damage, the cracks in the mask slowly started to appear. But I would say that this is just more of a visual nod to Hakuri's sorcery, which, you know, isn't what it used to be after he was in the coma. But Hakuri, employing a newfound confidence, tells them to surrender because you don't have a weapon. But these two are not having any of that surrendering bullshit. These 2 goons decide that they're going to knock him out, flying a knee square into the face of Hakuri and proceeding to beat the ever-loving fuck out of him. Hakuri starts to think about the current situation, saying, now, there's no way it's just these 3. Which obviously we know is true because we've already seen 3 more explosions alongside the one that just happened in front of Hakuri here. But he also thinks about how each one of these officers commands their own troop and wonders if in the worst case scenario the Hishaku have gotten to them too. Now, if I'm honest, this is a direction I could definitely see it happening in. However, I would be inclined to see that Ikuto right here is likely not one of the people that the Hishaku might have gone to. Maybe it's the optimist in me here, but I'd like to think after what Sojo did to Ikuto's squad here, he would be more bolstered in his faith to squash the Hishaku rather than fall to their demands. However, Kazane, he might not be so ready to fight for the Kamunabi again. He seemed, the last time that we saw him, he seemed to be very, very distraught at the loss of his squad after losing his arm, and I could definitely envision him pulling a Samura-style changing of sides here. Anyway, these 2 goons start realizing that their blows are just simply not doing shit to Hakuri here. Simply put, these dudes' toughness is just not on the same level as Hakuri. Despite even having trained within the Kamunabi for 5 years, these 2 just can't outbox someone like Hakuri, who has been taking a fucking beating for over a decade. Now, I love the way that this is actually described here for Soya, because a decade of bottomless love from the eldest Shion of the Sazanami clan. Now, remember, this dude is still active and still wandering about in the world, and honestly, I would love to see him be a reoccurring part of Hakuri's story going forward, like a jealous ex who just can't let go. He just doesn't want to let Hakuri move forward with his life. But Hakuri ends up using Iso in order to knock these 2 idiots out here, and it's here where he panics about why the pine tree didn't just explode and, you know, serrate him. But I have an answer for this, and obviously Hakuri does also too. Either death or a pre-existing command can activate this pine tree sorcery, is what I'm surmising here, because we saw in chapter 2 that this dude exploded the minute he talked about the Hishaku, meaning new information can't be leaked about the Hishaku from the goons that they are under these spells from. And finally, death is also a cause of this pine tree explosion, because these soldiers that the Hishaku is manipulating here are basically acting as self-destructing bombs, as we've already seen within this chapter. 4 of these dudes just got turned into a tree almost instantly, so there is a lot going on here. But this chapter does set up something extremely interesting for me, and it's from now on, there is no knowing who the enemies are. And that right there creates an extreme amount of tension, not only for the characters within the series, but also for us, the reader, I've done it plenty of times within this video and within the streams. I am constantly second guessing everyone and their motives right now, because any person we meet or have met is now under suspicion, with the exception of a few obvious selections. That option is available for about 90% of the cast right now, that they can potentially be a traitor. But we see here that Hakuri has his moment. I am one of the core fighters too. And I personally love this. Because Hakuri's story so far within the series has been one of him trying to prove his worth, breaking free of this abusive mental and physical chains that have been placed upon him by Sawyer and his father and his family, just constantly belittling him and beating him down. So to see him declaring his worth and even having confidence, even just before his little scrap, there was ounces of confidence coming from him. It's endearing to see, and I'm very, very excited to see more Hakuri from here. Anyways, that is everything from me. Big chapter. Definitely not an Azumi masterclass. It was a good chapter nonetheless. Anyways, if you've not already, please be sure to like and subscribe. Shueisha have been on my ass lately to try and get these videos taken down. So the bigger the channel is, the bigger the option that I have to fight back, the more fight the power, fight the corbos, that type of shit. Anyways, consider checking out my other content. I cover more manga, and I'm even branching out into comics nowadays. I recently dropped a Batman video and a Gachi Akuta video, if those take your fancy. If not, that's cool. But as always, I'll catch you guys all in the next one. Much fucking love, big fucking kisses, peace.